Hey, welcome. My name is Zach Garrett, and I'm the education manager for United World Wrestling, and certainly very excited to be here with you today. Today's topic is basic point scoring, and this is the first introductory course for referees, or introductory webinar for referees. And really what we're going to do is just kind of go through how points are scored from basic situations. So it's not going to be too complicated. Again, this is geared mainly for, I would say, national referees or those looking to become referees. I also noticed from the participants that are on here that we have a number of coaches that are on here as well. And honestly, I think this is a great webinar for coaches. And as an active coach myself, you know, one of the things I think in that position is understanding how points are scored and what referees are looking for. I think makes you a better coach, because that allows you to go back and teach techniques and adjust what you do to be able to maximize the amount of points that are being scored in those situations, or how to win those situations. So I think this is really a great webinar for both referees and for coaches. So I think it should be a great 30 minutes here with us today. As we get started, at the bottom, I know that some of you have already found the button. So there's a Q&A button located somewhere at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions during this time, please put those there. And at the end of the webinar, I'll take time to go back and answer as many questions as I can for 10 to 15 minutes once we conclude. I know that some of you have selected the hand raise button. That will, we won't really be able to utilize that aspect of it. But certainly if you have a question, type it in the Q&A section, and I will gladly get to that at the end of the webinar. To get started, one of the first things I kind of like to do here is just to find out where everybody is checking in from. So we've got, looks like 78 on the webinar today, so that's great. And so if you could just take a minute and, indicate where you are located at. So which continent, region are you checking in from? So you have about 30 seconds here to kind of see where everybody's checking in from. So it's always kind of interesting to find out, where everyone's from, and as we do these webinars. So another 10 seconds here, and we'll end the polling, and I'll share the results where everybody's from, at least those that voted. So hopefully you're able to see this, but it looks like we had a pretty even mix between the Americas, Asia, and Europe. So it's great to have everybody here, including those of you from Oceania and Africa. I know that many times we're navigating time differences, so I appreciate everybody taking the opportunity to be here today as we get started. Next thing to do is kind of get started with the presentation as we go through this. One of the first things we're going to get started here with, and I'm actually interested in, is we're going to take a look at a situation, and then just like you guys did for the poll question, I'm going to ask you to score what you believe the situation is, and I'm not going to go through the results and explain how it was scored. This is really just for me to see how you score it. We'll go through the webinar, and at the end of the webinar, I'll actually show this video, let you score again to see if you change your thought process on how it was scored. And then at the very end, I'll kind of go through how the situation was scored. So I'm going to show the situation, and I will show the video 2 times. And then after that, I'll run the poll, and then you tell me the score of the situation. So let's get started here. There was the first one, and here's the second time. So 2 times, and then we'll run the poll, and you'll pick one of the options that are listed. All right. So here are your choices. I'll give you 30 seconds to score it. What you think the correct score was here for this situation. I can tell you right now, and I'll share the results, but we've got at least one person has selected every answer on here, and there's certainly one that has a much bigger uh, total than the other. So another 10 seconds here, and I will share the results. All right, so here's the most common answer was 2 red. Second one was 2 blue, 1 red, and then 2 blue, 2 red. So again, just kind of looking at how everybody scored this. And again, I'm not going to go through the answer to this just yet. What I want to do is be able to go back through the webinar, and once we go through the webinar, be able to have you reevaluate that action again at the end, and then see if it changed, if your thought process has changed, or if you still believe it's the same score. So, and then we'll talk about it later. So, all right, today's objectives, or at least what we hope to accomplish here, is one, kind of to learn some basic terms when evaluating actions. I think that's an important process as you go through, is understanding the terms and how those get applied to certain scoring situations. We're then going to identify some just simple actions that score 1, 2, 4, and 5 points. So we'll kind of go through some different scenarios. Certainly, we're not going to be able to cover everything that exists in wrestling because it's such a dynamic sport that scoring, there's lots of ways to score. So we're just going to go through some basic examples. And then hopefully at the end of this, we'll be able to score a basic situation correctly. Like if you watch an action or you're watching a video online and you're like, what's the score? Hopefully by the end of today, you'll be able to watch that and be able to hopefully accurately score that. So those are what we hope to accomplish today. So let's get started. The first area here is the important terms. And I think anytime we look at this, we're evaluating actions, there are certain terms that continually keep coming up from a referee perspective and how you evaluate or score those. So the first term that comes up that we refer to a lot is just standing position. So very simply put, and this is just when both wrestlers are off their knees. So they're wrestling in the standing position. Now I will tell you that we often evaluate this from where's the defensive wrestler's position when the action started. So are they in the standing or are they in par terre? So that's the first part we're looking at. So standing position is just simply both wrestlers, are off their knees, or the wrestler is off their knees. They're in the standing position. The next one is par terre position. And par terre position really is just ground wrestling. This is where wrestling is occurring on the mat. And so that's either they're on one or both knees. This particular picture that you can see, blue made a leg attack. Now red and blue are both down on the mat. Red is sitting down. This is considered par terre wrestling. So anytime that there is ground wrestling, we refer to that as par terre. The same part, here's another picture for this, because often when we talk about, they need to get into par terre position, we refer to that, you see that often in Greco more than probably freestyle women's wrestling, just because there's forced par terre situations where they have to start in this particular position. So this is a really good example of what starting in par terre, what this would look like. But again, par terre for evaluating point purposes is really just considered ground wrestling. The next one here is what's called the danger position. And so we often said, well, did the wrestler go to danger? So danger is this criteria. The defensive wrestler has to touch an elbow, a shoulder, or a head, and has to be at an angle less than 90 degrees with their back. So they have to meet that criteria. So even if they're on their elbow, but their chest is facing the mat, that's not considered danger position. they have to be touching one of those three things, and their back has to be at an angle less than 90 degrees. So this is a good picture in terms of looking at the danger position, because red is touching an elbow. Her angle is less than 90 degrees to the mat. So this will be considered danger position. And again, when we're evaluating actions, that's an important evaluation part that referees have to make when they're scoring those points. The next one we often refer to as points of contact. And typically in order to get a takedown, you have to have 3 points of contact. And so I really just want to make sure I go through and cover what are your points of contact. And your points of contact are your head, your hands, and your knees. All right, so this picture, a little more difficult to see, but you can tell that the red wrestler is on both hands, and then they're on the far knee, which is kind of in that shaded part right there. So there's 3 points of contact. The blue wrestler has passed behind their hips, so this in case would be a takedown. But really the term here is just points of contact. And our points of contact for this are head, hands, and knees. And in order to have a takedown, you have to have 3 in contact with the mat and pass behind the hips with control. If they have that, then that meets the requirement for a takedown. We'll see a video come up a little bit later. The last term we have here is grand amplitude. And there's certainly some different ways that we can describe grand amplitude. I know for myself, one thing that I look at is, did their hips go over their chest in the action? And this is from the defensive wrestler, that the defensive wrestler's hips get above their chest during the action. And I think if we look at this picture, we can clearly tell here that red's hips are well above his chest. So this will be considered a grand amplitude in this process. So anytime you see that vertical line go up over the top during that action, great indicator for grand amplitude. Now what we do is we often take all of these terms and we have questions that we ask, and we put those all together to be able to score, to come up with what those points are being scored for that action. So you're going to hear these terms come up as we now start to get into evaluating simple scoring actions in this process. So now we're going to take a look and kind of go through each point, like here's 1 point actions, here's 2 point, 4.5, and 5 point. I can't tell you we're not going to go through like the negative wrestling aspect of this, like, what are cautions and things like that. We're just really looking at scoring situations and how those scoring situations, what the points should be in that process. So we're going to start off with our 1 point actions. And so the first one we have is what is called a step out. So we'll show the video here. So again, blue is the attacking wrestler, so blue attacks red, and then they just simply, red goes out of bounds. Now for out of bounds, in order to have a step out, you have to have your entire foot or your entire head have to be out of bounds in order for it to be out. In this case, you can tell red clearly goes out of bounds. There was not a takedown here, so this is just simply a step out of bounds. In this case, this will be scored 1 blue. So any action that starts inbounds and goes out of bounds and there's no scoring, if it's in the standing position, that's going to be 1 point. So I know that if we look at this, we say, well, they ended up in par terre out of bounds. You're right, they did end up in par terre out of bounds. But because the action started standing inbounds and it landed out of bounds in par terre, this is still considered standing and a step out, and this will be awarded 1 point. So 1 point for blue. The next one here is a 1 point for reversal. Now this particular video is actually going to show 2 scoring actions, one by red and then the second one by blue. And what we want to focus on here is the scoring by blue. So red gets the 2 points for the turn, which we'll come back here in a little bit when we get to our 2 point actions. But what we're looking at here is the reversal. So blue was in par terre and was a defensive wrestler. He then was able to come out on top of red, whether after an action or just in the process of wrestling. In this case, because red would already had the takedown and red scored points, now this is going to be considered a reversal and blue would only get 1 point in this situation. So this was scored. This will be 2 points for red and then a reversal for blue for 1 blue. So 2 red, 1 blue. And again, that's really, in terms of 1-point actions, there's some other situations that can come up. And again, we're not getting into the complicated aspects of what are all different places. We're really just focusing on what are the basic ones that you're going to see consistently, at the local level, at your national level, as you progressively go through this. All right, so the next thing we're going to look at are the 2-point actions. In this case, the first one we're going to look at here is a takedown. So this is going to refer back to one of our earlier terms that we looked at, which is our points of contact. So when we go back, we see that red makes a leg attack here and goes down and gets her into this position. Now, this position right now is not a takedown because there's not 3 points of contact with the mat. There's only 2, both of her hands. But as this continues, you will see her knee drop right there. And so her knee dropped, and as soon as her knee dropped, let's see if I can find the, right there. So now we have 3 points of contact. Red is behind the hips. She has control. Blue has 3 points of contact. So in this case, this is going to be 2 red. And as soon as she touches that knee, it's 2 red. And you can even tell as you watch the judge, as soon as she hit that knee, the judge immediately scored the 2 points for red. That was good. So 3 points of contact, scores the 2 points. And now if she comes back up, she still already earned that takedown in that process. The next 2-point action we'll look at are what's just considered any turns in Par Terre. So now that we got a takedown, we're on top, and now we're, some sort of turn, which is typically like a gut wrench or a leg lace, kind of depending on the style. But any turn in Par Terre is going to be 2 points. So in this case, here's red. Red makes a gut wrench and turns blue. So in this case, this is going to be 2 points for red because he made a turn in Par Terre. And when you have a turn in Par Terre in this situation, it does not matter whether they hit an elbow, shoulder, head. It's not important that they go to the danger position. The fact that there's any turn in that rotation, with an action is going to score 2 points. So in this case, this is 2 red. And I thought that was a great rule change a few years ago, because before it was like, did they go to danger? Were they hand to hand? And it was different. This made it much easier for referees and for really the public to be able to know how this was scored in the process. So that's 2 points for red just for a turn in Par Terre. Here's another action in Par Terre. See this in freestyle and women's wrestling. We have a leg lace, and she makes a turn. So there's 2 points. There's another 2 points. And there's another 2 points. So when we watch this action, again, just a turn in Par Terre, and you can have successive turns in a row. Again, she's going the same one. So there's the first 2 red. Here's the second 2 red. And then there's the third 2 red. So 2 reds in this situation before they go out of bounds. Again, because that last action started in bounds and then finished out, it's still able to score. So another 2-point situation. Here's another 2-point action. See this a little bit more common in Greco. Again, we had a turn in Par Terre. So the wrestlers were in Par Terre. They turned, went in the process, and so we scored this is going to be 2 points for blue. And in this situation, the question might come up is how many 2 points did it get? The first one, this first action, definitely 2 points for blue. I'm not sure red came back to defendable position there, but is definitely here. So that's going to be 2 blue, another 2 blue. So in this situation, I would have scored this as 2 blue, and then would have waited and then scored 2 more blue. And that's it. The very last action would have been considered out of bounds. So there's 2 blue, would not have scored that 2 blue. And then here's the second one. That third one, that very last one, is now out of bounds. So only 2 times in this situation, for my opinion. But again, what we're really looking at here is just the fact that this is a turn in the Par Terre position is going to generate 2 points. Another 2-point action is a correct hold. You see these a little bit more often in Greco-Roman, but certainly can be in any style. So that was a good example of it here. Red makes an action, and blue does not go to the danger position. And I think what we're looking for a lot of times here, at least one thing that I typically try to look for in correct throws is, number one, they didn't go to the danger position. It was really close in this, and it's hard to tell from this angle. But did the athlete go to a hip or chest? And in this case, the blue wrestler landed on his hip. So red made an action, and blue goes to this hip or lands on their chest. Now we have the potential for a correct hold. If the wrestler who was under attack, the defensive wrestler, would have landed on their knees or their feet during the action, that would not be considered a correct hold. So it has to be a little bit better than just making an action, but it has to be an action where that the defensive wrestler loses control and ends up hitting a hip or a chest during this action and does not go to danger. That's the key part here, is this does not go to danger. And many times these are very close, and the wrestlers do an incredible job of not going to danger. So in this case, we would score this as 2 points for red for a correct hold. Had blue gone to danger, that would have been a 4-point action. So correct throws, correct holds. And again, these can occur in any style, but again, they have to kind of meet that criteria of losing, the defensive wrestler losing control and landing on our hip or chest without going to danger. The next one here, 2-point action, is really anytime we have actions that start in par terre and go to danger. So here's a good example of, blue is going to make a leg attack. So at this point, we're now in the par terre position. Oops, I'll go back here, sorry. So blue makes a leg attack, and now they're in the par terre position here. And now red makes an action, gets her past that 90-degree angle. So she is going to score 2 points in this situation. So we're in par terre, and there's par terre to danger position. This is going to be considered 2 points. So she was in an angle, again, in an angle less than 90 degrees. And because they started this action in par terre to danger is only 2 points. So 2 points for red and no points here. And again, as you see and I'm going to make one point here. I think the two referees here are two of the best referees in the world. There's a lot of great referees, and depending on where you're at in your angle, depends on how you view the situation. So by no means am I looking or questioning, these two individuals and say, well, how did they miss that? I'll be honest with you, refereeing is very difficult. And if you haven't done it before, I encourage you to give it a try, especially for those of you that are coaches that are on this webinar, because it's difficult to be correct every time. And certainly I can show situations where I was the referee on the mat and I didn't score it right. So I think that as we go through and watch this, simply just look at the actions and let's try not to judge what the referees are scoring or what they scored. Because again, it's a difficult job, and it's difficult to always get them correct in this situation. So I want to make sure I brought that point up, because again, I think that these are two of the best in the world, and certainly, maybe I don't agree with how they scored this, but I do know that it's also, if you're not in the right angle, it's difficult to tell if there was scoring there or not. Here's another action, 2 points from par terre. This happens to be a counterattack from par terre. So blue steps over, is able to hook that leg and hold red in the danger position. So in this case, she would score 2 points. So again, if we have a counterattack that occurs in par terre, that is going to also be 2 points. So danger position in par terre is 2 points. This action also resulted in a fall, and so blue is the winner. Here's another 2-point action. And so what's interesting about this is this action actually starts standing, and then they go to par terre. And then the second action that occurs here is what scores. So blue makes a really nice action, but they go to par terre first. And then blue has to do a second action by running his feet and popping him over. And so in this situation, this is going to be considered going from par terre to danger because the action went down first and then drove, and then took them over. So in this case, this would be 2 points for blue in this scenario. So again, even if it starts standing, if it goes to danger, it has to be direct to danger. If there is a pause or they land, and then there's a second action that causes them to go over, once they end up on the mat and that second action has to occur, now that's going to be considered par terre to danger and is only going to be scored as 2 points for this situation. Now we're getting into our 4-point actions. So very similar to what you just saw, but in this case, these actions are going to go from the standing position directly to danger. So there's not going to be a pause or a second action to get them to danger. It's going to be directly from standing to the danger position. So here is an example of a very common freestyle one. So we had a double leg that went from standing, and then blue went directly to the danger position. And again, I want to make sure I point out and emphasize here that the blue wrestler was in the standing position when this action started. You know, red goes to the mat, hits a knee on this leg attack, but because blue was in the standing position, that's how we evaluate the action. Is the defensive wrestler, they were standing, and he goes directly to danger. So in this case, this is going to be 4 points for blue. Another action here. Again, we have a fireman's carry. Again, very common you see in freestyle and women's wrestling. And so here, blue makes a leg attack. And you can see here, you know, blue is now down on her knees, and she's on her knees for the duration of this. But again, we're evaluating this from the defensive wrestler standpoint. And what I want you to notice is that red comes to the standing position, you know, right there, and now blue makes an action. So now we're standing directly to danger. So 4 points. So the judge did a great job here of scoring that as 4 points for blue. Another action here, Greco-Roman, going from standing directly to danger again. A very nice action right there on an arm throw. Again, standing directly to danger. 4 points for blue. Yes, 4 points for blue. Now, here's one of the situations we had before where we were standing, they went to par terre, and then they turned. Here's going to be a situation where they start on par terre, and then we're going to get a lift. And so once we get a lift, they lift them up off the mat. Now this becomes a standing position. So red is able to lift blue, makes the action, and rotates him down. And he hits that elbow on the backside there for 4 points for red. So again, we start in par terre, but now we get a lift. Once they're lifted up off the mat, this is now considered to be standing position. And now we have standing directly to danger. That's going to be 4 points. Another 4-point action here, and this can be a result of a counterattack. So here we have the blue wrestler is attacking red, but red makes a counterattack. Counterattack, again, started in the standing position. So blue was standing when this action occurred. And because he was standing and goes to danger, this is going to be 4 points for red. So again, it all depends on where that defensive wrestler's position is when that action occurred. So keep that in mind as you go back and reevaluate the first action we started with in this webinar when we get back to it. Where was the defensive wrestler when that action occurred? All right, here blue is in the standing position and went to danger as a result of the counterattack. So this is going to be 4 points for red. The last 4-point action we have here is grand amplitude. In this case, there's a key word up here that says no danger. So we had grand amplitude. So we looked at it, said, wow, this is a great throw. This has grand amplitude, but it does not land in danger. So if we have grand amplitude, no danger, this is going to be considered 4 points. And this is a really good action for this to see this. Blue gets a great lift, elevates, and rotates him all the way over the top. So that is a great example here. We have a reverse lift. So he lifts him up off the ground. So now we're in the standing position. And now you're going to watch red's hips go directly over the top here in this process. But when he lands here, notice how he's landing. He's landing with his chest down. He actually over-rotated him on the throw. So in the process of that, red never landed in the danger position. So he didn't hit an elbow, hit a shoulder, hit a head at an angle less than 90 degrees. So in this case, we have grand amplitude, no danger. So in this case, this will be 4 points for blue in this scenario. Again, just a really good look at this. And I think anytime you see, like in Greco-Roman, you see a reverse lift and a rotation up like this, if they land in danger, it's going to be 5. If they don't, it's going to be 4. And a lot of times, this particular scenario, they over-rotate them many times and they land on their chest. So in this case, grand amplitude, no danger. The next part here is the 5-point actions. 5-point actions, this is grand amplitude to danger. So you have to have both situations here. It has to be considered grand amplitude, and they have to go to danger. So we're going to see a couple of situations here. Here's one from the standing position in freestyle as well. A couple of years ago at the World Championships, again, just before time was out, elevates and directly over the top. It was an excellent action. You can even tell from the judge. The judge was like, wow, that was a great action. And I agree. So he gets him up. Notice blue's hips go over top of his chest, lands in the danger position. So in this case, this is going to be 5 points for red. So great action there. And then here we have one that starts again. Here's a lift. We see in Greco-Roman, a lift from Par Terre. From red, elevates him up and directly to danger. So hips go over top of the chest again. So whether it starts in Par Terre, but once it lifts, we get to the standing position. And now we have grand amplitude. And this time blue goes directly to danger. So grand amplitude to danger is going to result in 5 points for red. So this is kind of going through some of the basic scoring that we see. I think the one thing that I typically try to come up with, is once we get to this, and I'll take some questions here in a second, and potentially if I need to go back and show other videos. But really, when we're evaluating points, especially when we're looking at the difference between 2 point, 4 point, and 5 point actions, I try to ask myself a series of questions. And so there are 3 questions that I ask essentially on every action that occurs. That's not like a step out, but is it 2, 4, or 5? The first question is, did the action start in standing or was it in Par Terre? That's the first question I ask, standing or Par Terre. And again, that's from the defensive wrestler's perspective. The second question is, did it go to danger or not? So was it danger or no danger? And the last question was it grand amplitude? And that's a yes or no question. So really two of these are yes or no questions. Yes, it went to danger. No, it didn't. Or yes, it was grand amplitude, or no, it wasn't. And your answer to all 3 of those questions essentially will help you score those actions. And a lot of times I start with the grand amplitude question. When I see it, the first thing that comes to my mind was this grand amplitude? Because if it's grand amplitude, your only 2 choices for points are 5 or 4. That's your only options. If it's not grand amplitude, now your choices are 4 or 2. So I'd like to answer that question first, and then I move into the second question is, did they go to danger or not? And then the third question is, was it standing or Par Terre? But if I answer the first question of grand amplitude, they had to be standing if it was grand amplitude. If it wasn't grand amplitude, now I'll ask that question. Was the defensive wrestler in the standing position or were they in Par Terre? And then did they go to danger or not danger? So for example, if I had a situation where there was no grand amplitude, the defensive wrestler was in the standing position and they did not go to danger, then that action would score 2 points. Because no grand amplitude means it's either 4 or 2. And the next is Did it go to danger or no danger? If it's no danger, the best I can score it is going to be 2 points. If it's just an action, and that would be similar to like a correct hold. It was standing, didn't go to danger, and it wasn't grand amplitude, so 2 points. So evaluating those questions often allows you to be able to score those points. In particular, if somebody asks you why you scored points, your answer to those questions typically gives the reasoning behind why you scored that. All right, now before we get into the very end of this, I'm going to go back and go back to that very beginning situation that we had, and I'll do that right at the very end of this. But first, I'll take a few questions. So if you've gone to the Q&A, if you have a question, please write it there, and I will gladly go through and answer it. I see some good mornings, so certainly good morning to all of you out there. So I know there's a lot of great friends that are on this webinar. So some of you I haven't seen in a couple of years, so it's great to have you here. So one question here, must he land in danger in order to get 5 points? Yeah, correct. And I see you responded back to that question as well. Yeah, if you're going to score 5 points for an action, it has to be in danger, and it has to be grand amplitude and danger. So both of those criteria have to be met. So again, if they land on their stomach or their belly, that is not going to be able to score 5 points. When the action throws start from standing to out of the red zone. I think the one thing we didn't get into a lot of times here is when we have actions going out of bounds, that's a whole, probably another webinar topic, because certainly the out of bounds situation is one of the most complicated, I think, for referees to score, because there's so many things that occur in that situation. But if the action starts in bounds and the red wrestler is able to finish their action out of bounds, it still scores. So if they make a throw, let's say red double legs blue, and finishes and blue lands in the danger position out of bounds, we're still going to score that as 4 points. So as long as the action starts in bounds, it can finish out of bounds in that situation. If the action is not completed, like if they start an action in bounds but they're not able to finish it, then it goes to whoever went out of bounds first, and whoever is out of bounds first, the other wrestler will receive 1 point. And so the next question here, how about a fail throw? Are we going to a standing position without losing points? Yes. So, and again, there are certainly a number of topics and things that we're not getting into, particularly with this webinar, because really we're just focusing on just the scoring of points in basic situations. But what you're talking about is it risk or no risk? And if a wrestler makes a risk and is not able to finish their action and doesn't get held in the danger position, then the action will be considered a risk. It would be no points, and then the wrestlers will be brought into the standing position. And I certainly think that that's an important aspect that you consider as you continually to get more into more situations, and because as soon as we stop rewarding risk, athletes and wrestlers will stop making actions. Because I know there was a time period, really a number of years ago, where anything that wasn't scoring, we were scoring as 2 points for a takedown. So they make an action, they didn't score, they got to their belly, but then we were scoring everything as 2 points for the takedown. And when that happens, wrestlers stop taking actions because they don't want to lose the points. As long as we keep rewarding risk and bring them back to the standing position when it's not scored, I think that we encourage them to take more actions, which I think is better for the sport and makes it more exciting. So yeah, we should, if it's a risk situation, it would be no points and brought to the standing position. So a question here, a difference between grand amplitude and low amplitude. So I really, if it's not grand amplitude, then, in terms of scoring actions, I don't really kind of consider, low amplitude. If it's grand amplitude, we had that, the hips over the chest. If it's not, if it's a low amplitude action where maybe they make a lift, they lift and they make an action. Now that's just a standing position, and that's just the next thing I'm looking at is, so if I consider it in the standing position, they make a lift and it's a standing action. Now I'm looking at, did they go to danger or not? Because if they go to danger, it's 4 points. If they don't go to danger, it's 2 points. So really, I try to focus really on what type of amplitude it is really, is it grain amplitude or is it not? If it's not considered grain amplitude, then it's the other. So I would say focus mostly on that aspect. Did the hips get over the chest in the action? If it does, that's grain amplitude. Your choices are 5 and 4. It's 5 if it goes to danger. It's 4 if it doesn't go to danger. If it is not grain amplitude, so the hips don't go over the chest, now is it that your only point possibilities are 4 points and 2 points. If it goes to danger, it's 4 points. If it doesn't go to danger, it's 2 points. Next question here, Greco-Roman step out, how many points is that? The step out is indifferent to the style. It doesn't matter which style it is. Every step out in any style, freestyle, women's wrestling, or Greco-Roman, is going to be 1 point. All right, so here we have a kind of a complicated question here. So if a wrestler is standing on all fours, knees off the mat, so we're in what we call, in the US, we call that a quad pod, because we've got four touching points, 2 hands and 2 feet. And then put 1 knee on the mat, that would be 2 points. So if the knee goes back after 5 seconds, then the whole body goes mat. Would this be 2 points? No, because we've already scored that action. We're going to score that one time as 2 points, and that's going to be the end of it. Now, if they come up and down, it's not too irrelevant. Only if they came up and almost came to a complete standing position and faced them, and then go back down, will we look at scoring another 2 points for that takedown. But if the knee goes down, touches, you score the 2 points, and then they break them down again, really it's the same action. We're not going to score that 2 times. Good, great question. Next one, red makes an action when both in the standing position, just a leg attack. Blue lands on the hip with stretched arms. Is this considered 2 red? I think this largely depends a little bit on, what that leg attack looks like. Like, do they have 1 leg? Is it 2 legs? There's a lot of factors that get into this. And I think the one thing as we go through these situations, every one has to be evaluated based on what it looks like. There's many competitions I go to, particularly at the national and local level, where they'll be like, somebody will come up to me and describe a situation to me. And based on their description, that's what the points probably should have been. That doesn't mean that's exactly what happened in that situation. So when we have certain really complicated situations, I would probably have to see the situation to be able to tell you, is that 2, is it not 2? I would say that if they have both legs and they hit both hands, that's going to be 2 points. I would say if they have 1 leg attack and the one hand hits, one hand hits, but then they come back and they're still defending, and red never really had control and only has 1 leg in this process, it's possible that it may not be 2 red in that situation. He may have to finish the action in order to get that. So again, some situations we would have to actually see the video to be able to probably give you a accurate score for that. Next one, when both wrestlers' head went out of bounds, who gets the point, or is it no point? So I think the one thing we look at when we're looking at out of bounds is, were the wrestlers in the par terre position first before they went out of bounds? So if they're in par terre and then they go out of bounds, it's no points. If they are standing and then their head lands out of bounds, then somebody's going to get a point. And you typically who's going to score that point is whose head hits first if there's no points that get scored. So head going out can result in 1 point, but it has to start from the standing position in order to get that. If it's in par terre, they're in a whizzer situation like hip to hip, and their heads both go out, that's going to be no points because they were in par terre. If you ever get a situation where it's really close on who went out of bounds first, typically the attacking wrestler is the one who gets the point if it's close. If it's not close and the attacking wrestler goes out first before the defensive wrestler and there's no score, whoever goes out of bounds first, the other wrestler gets the point. A correct throw or near throw, yeah, certainly the next question is the term correcto similar to near throw? I've not heard of the term near throw, but certainly probably potentially in the language differences, that certainly is a possibility that that could be the same thing. Another situation with risk. So could you please give and explain a risk situation? I think that anytime, like for example, if a wrestler makes a headlock, so they try to take a head and arm and they rotate down, and in the process of making that head and arm action, they go directly down to the par terre position, they lose the head and arm, and then the other wrestler just comes on top of them. And for this to be risk, again, the defensive wrestler at the time does nothing. The attacking wrestler does everything, makes the action, and just slips off and goes to the ground. The other wrestler comes on top. That's going to be considered a risk. That's a situation where that would be no points, and you would go back to the standing position. So if the defensive wrestler does nothing to earn the points, then it's going to be considered risk. The defensive wrestler has to do something, create a counterattack, or hold that wrestler in the danger position in order for it to not be risk. Again, really, this is probably better looked at if we looked at certain videos. We could certainly go through that. And again, potentially down the road, I know that there may be situations where we're looking at very specific areas. Risk versus no risk is a great topic. A few more questions here, and then I'm going to kind of wrap this up. So I'll kind of go through a couple more. And certainly, if I don't get to your question, you're more than welcome to email me at any time. I would be more than happy to answer your questions, or if you have a video, share it with me, and then I'll give you my opinion in the process. But I'll answer a few more questions, and then we'll kind of wrap up a little bit and look at that last situation and score that again. So it says wrestler takes the back, lifts, but during the throw steps out. I think a lot of times what we're looking at here is does the action get completed out of bound? If we have a lift and then the attacking wrestler steps out, if they complete their action, we're going to score that action. If they step out with 1 foot, their action is still valid. If they would have a lift and step out with 2 feet before the action, then because they have in the rules, if you have your opponent lifted and you step out, then it's going to be no points and then coming back to the center with no points back to the center and restart in the standing position. Last one here, if an action starts from par terre and then goes to danger with high amplitude, would it be a score of 4 or 5? So what I will tell you is if it's grand amplitude, it's going to have to go to danger directly. If it goes to par terre first, where they land down, like we saw with that one reverse lift where they lifted them and rotated them down back to the par terre, then that's only going to be 4 points if it's grand amplitude. If it's grand amplitude, it'll be standing and it has to go directly to danger to get 5 points. So if they land in par terre first, then either it wasn't grand amplitude because the action just lifted and then they just went straight down, or if the action was really big but they didn't land in danger directly, they landed on their chest first, then that would be grand amplitude, no danger, and that would only be 4 points. So again, I'd like to thank you. There were certainly some great questions with this, and I'd love to be able to get to all of them, but I do want to try to wrap this up here with inside an hour. And again, if I did not get to your question, please feel free to email me. I know that I've got some of you, I know there's some good friends on here, and I know some of you, there's some individuals here that contact me, frequently with scoring situations, and I certainly will always give you my opinion about what it is and why I believe that. Certainly, I'm always here to help, really, try to, help wrestling and grow wrestling in this process. So the last thing here, kind of going back, presentation-wise, just a quick review. So when we look at this, just some things to keep in mind, and I think we've touched on these quite a bit, which is just making sure that you understand the terms that are associated with it, because those terms help you evaluate the points. You know, were they in the stand? Was the defensive wrestler in the standing position, or were they in par terre? And knowing the difference between the two. You know, what is considered danger position? You know, I've had a number of conversations during this time, during this COVID-19 time, with a number of national coaches, and which was really interesting to me was where their perception of what danger was. You know, so at elbow, shoulder, head, and at an angle less than 90 degrees is what's required for it to be considered danger position. You know, because many times we always think that, well, if they get rotated, that's danger. Well, no, danger is that criteria. So making sure understanding that will certainly help you evaluate points better as well. Knowing the points of contact is really a great, you know, is it a takedown? Is it not a takedown? When you see why are they waiting to score points? They're waiting for those points of contact to be met for a takedown. And then that last one with grand amplitude, I think anytime we're looking at it is, did their hips get over their chest? A lot of times in that vertical plane that goes up, you know, then that's considered grand amplitude. And then you apply all those, and then it allows you to score the points. And certainly, I think, you know, what we looked at some, I would say, some fairly basic situations. But keep in mind that wrestling is very complicated and it is very dynamic. And depending on where you're standing and your view of the action and the camera angle, all will give you an idea, or maybe give you a different opinion on how something gets scored. So, you know, if you haven't ever given refereeing a try, particularly at your national level, please give it a try, especially if you're a coach. It will give you a new perspective on how it works, because I know when you watch actions, it looks easy, like, oh, wow, they score that 4 points. And then you get out there, there's a lot more to do than just scoring the points. And I think that adds to that. And I would certainly encourage all of you to, if you haven't ever refereed, to give a chance as coaches, get out and do that. It will help you learn the rules better, and as a result will make you a better coach. All right, so here is the last situation again. So I'm going to play it. I'll play it again 2 more times, and then I'm going to rerun the same poll and see if there's any change in the scoring, at least your thought process. So I'll show it one more time because the first one kind of started a little bit in the middle, so we'll try it again. So there it was. Oops, and we'll go one more time. All right, excellent. Let's try this again here. So let's relaunch this. And how would you score this situation? So I'll give you 30 seconds. Give it a try. We'll see if anybody's ideas changed on the scoring. And certainly this is a little bit more complicated of a situation and something that occurs very quickly. And I will tell you, if there's probably one area, there's certain areas where, you know, scoring is often sometimes not correct, and there's certain situations that get called a little more incorrect than others. This is one of them. So if you get this wrong, certainly don't feel bad in the process. Like, this is just it's a learning process, and know that these are sometimes very difficult to get correct, especially when they happen really quickly and there's so many little things to watch. So about another 10 seconds here, and I will end the polling and show the results. Still very similar, I'll tell you that. So sharing the results. So here is what we had in the process. So hopefully you can see this. So majority of people are still scoring this as 2 red for that takedown. What I did notice here is the 2 blue, 1 red gained a little bit more ground. So a few more people switched over to this one in this process. So let's go through this. So I'm going to close this, and we'll watch this video one more time here. Actually, make sure I stop sharing results here. Okay. So let's go back through this, and again, just kind of showing this action one more time. So red makes the attack, the initial attack. So red makes the attack right here. Now blue makes a counter attack. So red is not going to his back in this situation because he wanted to. Blue makes this action right here where he's got his head and hips him to that side. And you can see here, red goes to the danger position. So in this case, blue's counterattack is going to be scored. And now when we look at this, when blue starts his action, red's knee is on the mat. And because red's knee is on the mat, red is now considered in the par terre position. Again, we're looking at it from the defensive wrestler's position, not the offensive wrestler. Yes, blue was in the standing position when blue made this action, but blue is not who we're looking at in this situation. We're looking at the defensive wrestler, and you can see here the defensive wrestler made that leg attack. They're on their knees, and now blue makes a counterattack, and red is in par terre. And so as they go, he rotates him down, and there he's in the danger position. So now we're going to have 2 points for blue. And because blue scored 2 points, red comes up on top. They're going to score 1 red. So those of you that scored 2 blue, 1 red, great job, because that's how this should be scored. And I believe that after there was a consultation, that's how it was scored here. But this is a really good and certainly a more complex situation than what we went through before. And I would always encourage you, like, there's so many ways to practice. There's so many matches that are out there on the United World Wrestling YouTube channel. You can practically watch every match that's out there. You watch the match and just practice your scoring. See how you would score it, and then compare it to what got scored, and just kind of go through that process. But certainly ways to improve yourself during this time. So again, I'd just like to thank everybody for being here with us during this hour. So certainly appreciate your time and in this process. And if you have any questions, please certainly reach out to me. I'll gladly help in any way possible I can. I will tell you that this webinar with essentially the same videos, etc., are going to be, this is also going to be done in 3 other languages over the next 2 weeks. So this will be done again on Friday in French. And then next week, this is going to be done in Spanish and in Russian. So as from the development department, we're trying to do these educational webinars over the course of 2-week spans, where we do them in all 4 languages before we rotate to the next topic. So, in a couple of weeks, in 2 weeks at this day and this time, so on Wednesday in the morning, at least my time, I'll be back here, and that topic then will be looking at the UWW vocabulary for referees, and then also with the referee team duties. So we won't get into probably a lot of like scoring situations. We'll be talking more about just what it takes to, as you're becoming a referee from a national referee and you're wanting to make that jump to an international referee, what are some things you need to know to do that. And so that's what a lot of our webinars will be geared for from the development department. We certainly do have coaching webinars as well going on. Many times are good for both coaches and referees. I know tomorrow I'll be doing a webinar on risk management for coaches, like assessing risk. So I would encourage you to take advantage of the webinars. We are recording this, and this will eventually get loaded onto our education platform that we hope to have released by the end of this month. And then you'll have access to all of these webinars during that time. So again, I just want to thank everybody for being here today. And if you have any questions going forward, please reach out to me, and always appreciate the help. So thanks again.